when the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven in a whirlwind. Elijah and Elisha was traveling from Gilgal, and Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here, for the Lord has told me," say, "The Lord has told me, to go to Bethel." But Elisha replied, "As surely as the Lord lives and you yourself live, I will never," say, "I will never leave you," shout, "leave you." So they went down together to Bethel. The group of prophets from Bethel came to Elisha and asked him, "Did you know that the Lord is going to take your master away?" Shout, "Take away from you today." "Of course I know," Elijah answered, "but be quiet about it." Then Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here, for the Lord has told me to go to Jericho." But Elisha replied again, "As surely as the Lord lives and you yourself live, I will never leave you." So they went on together to Jericho. Then the group of prophets from Jericho came to Elisha and asked him, "Listen, did you know that the Lord is going to take your master away from you today?" "Of course I know," Elisha answered, "but be quiet about it." Then Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here, for the Lord has told me to go to the Jordan River." But again Elisha replied, "As surely as the Lord lives and you yourself live, I will never leave you." So they went on together. 50 men from the group of prophets also went and watched from a distance as Elijah and Elisha stopped beside the Jordan River. Then Elijah folded his cloak together, struck the water with it. The river divided, the two of them crossed over on dry ground. When they came to the other side, Elijah said to Elisha, "Tell me, what can I do for you before I'm taken away?" And Elisha replied, "Please let me inherit a double share," say double share, "of your spirit and become your successor." There is the reading. Shout amen. Please be seated. God, we thank you on this weekend. We're also remembering and celebrating another preacher, another pastor, in the person of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We thank you for his life. We thank you for his ministry. And we thank you that as we remember Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., we're remembering a pastor, a preacher. We're remembering a faith community. We're remembering a church that helped to give birth to a movement that changed the world. Thank you for reminding us today that the church remains relevant in changing the world. Now, take broken flesh that I am and fill me with your spirit. Speak to us in ways that will keep driving change, that will help us to be impactful in the world also. In Jesus' name. And everyone shout amen. 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 Praise God. For those of you who may be joining us for the very first time, we are actually in the middle of a series on change. Big idea that's attached to this series is simply this: change for your life is possible. If you can learn, you can change. If you can grow, you can change. Over the last 3 weeks, we have essentially made a couple of points. Number one, I have argued that one way of looking at change is through what we call the principle of the path. Everybody shout path. What I mean by that is that every path, every road leads to a particular destination, and that path will lead to that destination every single time. And so if you think about change, you should potentially think about what path is my life on, and perhaps I should change paths. I told you that all of our decisions are connected, whether we recognize it or not, and often our decisions form patterns in our lives. So change suggests that I should look at the kind of decisions that I'm making and where are those decisions leading me to. Path. Also, on last week, I told you that a major shift as we think about what path that I'm on is if you decided that you wanted to live a life on a path where the God of the universe is actually directing your steps. And I said to you that you had to make the decision that you wanted to grow your ability to trust God, and one of the things I suggested was this DARE prayer. I hope you've been praying it. I've suggested you do it for the next 30 days. And it's a simple prayer, but it opens you up for God's guidance. And the prayer goes like this: Lord, show me which path to take. Reminded that Scripture says, if you should acknowledge him in all your ways, and he will direct your path. The second part of the prayer is, and give me the wisdom to see the next step. And give me the courage to take it. At the end of the day, it really doesn't matter whether you see the path or whether you know the right step. You actually have to have the courage to take it. Everybody shout courage. I want to suggest this afternoon that at the heart of change is the requirement of courage. In many ways, Pastor Dan, life and this passage, they come together today. And what we heard from Pastor Dan, who does live his life in such a way that God is leading him. You heard him talk about the different transitions over his ministry. And he didn't say this, but he told me this, and I resonate with it so much. He said that he promised God years ago that ministry would never become a career for him. It would always be a call. Meaning that if ever there came the occasion that God would say it's time to leave, no matter how great things were for him there as a career, he would move because God said move. That's what it means to lean in, to begin to allow God, the creator of the universe, to drive the details of your life. And it takes courage. Come on, say that word again. Say courage. Now, one last thing I want to say about change. I think what Pastor Dan has illustrated today gives us even another paradigm as we think about the path, another way of looking at change. Actually, one could say that change happens on two different levels. First, there is the event of change. Shout event. The event is like an announcement, like Pastor Dan said, in the next 3 months, we're transitioning. An event like the birth of a new child. An event like a divorce decree that takes place. There is the event. And then there is how we process the event, the internal way in which on the inside of our hearts and our minds, we actually process that event. And if we process it well, then in fact we change in healthy ways. And if we don't process it well, we get stuck. And it tends to block healthy change. So let me give you 3 levels of 3 stages to what I think is healthy change. And then we're going to see how this text walks us through. Every transition begins with an ending. Important for us to recognize that. So the first stage to real change is endings. Everybody say the ending. The ending. So part of the challenge for some of us in new relationships or in new jobs or in new places is that we haven't really quite come to terms with this, because what we really want to do, we want to avoid endings while we grab for new. It usually doesn't work that way. You've got to let go of this in order to grab hold to that. Secondly, as we work through old endings, we will find ourselves in what I call the middle. The middle, or I'm using a term out of history, this is using it differently here. The middle passage, it's the in-between. Everybody say the middle. And in that space, when we are letting go in the midst of change, when we're dealing with old endings, the middle is composed of confusion and emptiness and unclarity. And then comes the last stage, which we call simply new beginnings. Everybody say new beginnings. That if I can handle my endings well, and if I can navigate and work through and figure out who am I as I go through the middle passage, then it opens me up in a healthy way to receive the new thing that God has for me to receive. New beginnings. This is the internal process that we should be working through as we work on change. Sometimes change we initiate, sometimes change that happens to us. Now, this passage is instructive then in that light. This passage that we read is all about change. It has all the elements of change. It has fear, it has pain, it has grief, it has loss, it has the endings, it has new beginnings. It's all right here in this passage. Now, first of all, let's focus in on Elisha and on Elijah. And Elijah, he's the one that's leaving, and he has a lot to teach us about what I want to call positive change. The text starts off by saying this, that when Elijah was about to be taken to heaven in a whirlwind. So A, the change is initiated by God. B, it's good change because there's only two biblical characters in the Old Testament who got to go to heaven without dying. One is Enoch and the other one is Elijah. So it's a pretty good deal if you could get to heaven without dying. That's what Elijah does. Everybody say good deal, good deal. Come on. All right, that's a good change. It's a good change, all right? So it's God-directed. It's a good change, right? Elijah has a real sense of, he's clear about the fact that God is calling, and he's got a real sense of peace about it, and that's all good. If there's anything bad in it, is that ultimately Elijah has to say goodbye to multiple communities that he's been pouring his life into. And so that's a community of young prophets that he's been training at Gilgal. That's a community of young prophets he's been training at Bethel. There's a community of young prophets he's been training at Jericho and off from the Jordan River. So in all these communities, there's these young men that he have gathered, and he's been pouring his life into. And so while this is good change, he has to say goodbye to folk that he loves. Interesting enough, he shows us how to do it. Great text. The text says, as he's leaving Gilgal, he says, watch this. He says to Elisha, God told me to go to Bethel. That's where a group of prophets are. Then later he says, God told me to go to Jericho, another group. He says, God told me later on to go to Jordan River. What he's saying is God is directing him, and God is leading him through a process of how to transition well. So each community that he goes to, Gilgal, to Bethel, to Jericho, he's finding a group of young men there. He's sharing with them the news that he's leaving, and here's what happens. He initiates a process of remembering, celebrating, giving God thanks, embracing, I'm sure, with lots of tears, and then release. He's in Gilgal. It's same process. He's in Bethel. Same process. I'm sure that this was going on. They're remembering, telling stories and remembering. They're celebrating, rejoicing about the wonderful things. They're giving thanks for what they've shared together. They are embracing in the midst of great tears. They are embracing, and then they are releasing. Now, Elijah teaches us that there is a such thing as good change, and that there is a such thing as healthy transitions if you do it this way. Now, let's just be honest. Many of us, our lives have scattered across our history what I call unhealthy transitions. I like to refer to them. There's a difference between either broken or unfinished endings versus blessed endings. What Elijah is doing is he's leading us to a process of blessed endings. But many of us have had just horrendous broken endings. I mean, for example, had in the text, Elijah had simply, that everybody had awakened and discovered that Elijah was abruptly gone. There was no ability to say goodbye. There was no, just everything just torn apart because he's gone. Well, that would be a bad transition. The fact is that many of us in our own lives, we've had bad transitions. That when we left from one relationship, it was a bad relationship, it was a bad exit, everything about it was bad. And some of us 3 relationships later, every time we remember leaving a relationship, we remember it was just bad. It was just bad. The transition was just bad. It was fighting and court cases and suing and lawyers and cursing and shooting. And it's just bad. Right? Even for those of you, some of you are not familiar to the church scene, and some of you have been in the church all your life, and so you know this to be true, that when transitions often happens in churches with pastors, it's usually a bad scene. I mean, it's just shooting and cutting. No. It's usually, though, somebody's gotten fired, or there's some scandal. And we're trying to get to some scandal. And we're not used to good, healthy transitions. And yet life is always in flux. And there will be transitions. And Pastor Dan transitioned. And I'm going to transition at some point. But the church of God will continue, right? But transition happens. And it's bigger than all of us. Thank God. Come on, you can applaud that. The church is bigger than me. It's bigger than PT. It's bigger than... So what we have to do is to learn how to, and what God, I think, is reminding us is it's possible to have healthy transitions in the church. So over the next 3 months, what we'll be doing with Pastor Dan, he'll be leading us the way Elijah led Elisha and that community. Over the next 3 months, we will have opportunities to intersect with him so that we can remember, celebrate, give God thanks, embrace with all sorts of tears and joy and release. Now, there's another insight in this same pattern that's important, and that is, if we don't do it correctly, if we don't learn how to transition, manage change in our lives correctly, we end up, watch this, we will end up in new places, but always going back to old activities. Now, I just learned about this. There is a shellfish that is located that you can find in the oceans. And I'm told that the shellfish opens and closes in rhythm with the tide of the ocean. As the tide is coming in and going out, the shellfish opens and closes in rhythm with the tide. But I'm also told that if you take that same shellfish, move it 3,000 miles away from that ocean and put it in a laboratory, watch it, that shellfish will continue to open and close in rhythm with where it used to be. And that's what's happening to some of us. Now, I suspect there's somebody in here now who was in a relationship maybe 5, 6, 7 years with a guy or girl. You're either living with them or maybe you're married. Whatever the case is, that relationship has come to an end. And now you're in a new relationship, but you remember every anniversary that was significant of that old relationship. And maybe you haven't told anybody, but when those significant moments come, you find yourself opening and closing in rhythm with an experience of your yesterday. If you're not careful, you'll end up in new places, constantly going back to old activities, relationships. This is why some of you find yourself going to the same restaurant on a regular basis, even though you're in a new relationship, because you know that he usually comes and has lunch in that in that restaurant. You haven't figured out how to say goodbye. You haven't figured out how to transition. This is why some of you, you pass by her Facebook page at least 3 times a week. Opening and closing in rhythm with an old experience. Because you haven't properly said goodbye. And then the next insight that comes from this text is we've looked at change from the perspective of Elijah. He's the one that's leaving. But now let's change our focus and shift our focus and look at change from the perspective of Elisha, the one being left. Now, there's some insight when we look at this text from Elisha's perspective. Now, this is a couple of insights. Let's go to the text. The first thing that you'll notice in the text is how the fellows from the school of prophets translates Elijah's leaving to Elisha. They say 3 times in the text, do you know that today the Lord is going to take your master from you? Everybody say take. And they're saying it in such a way as to depict this. And what they're suggesting is, do you know that today the Lord is going to rip out of your life this person that you love? That's what Elisha is here. Rip out of your life. That's what he says. He's going to take him from you. He's going to rip him out of your life. Now, God wasn't ripping Elijah out of their lives. As a matter of fact, God was leading Elijah through a wonderful process of saying goodbye. But it felt like a ripping, and oftentimes it feels like a ripping to you, not because this particular incident is a ripping, but because 3 or 4 other relationships back, there was a ripping, and there was a ripping. So this is a good transition, but it feels still like a ripping. Did you know? Yes, God was going to take him, but it wasn't a ripping. And then notice the second thing. In the language, here's Elisha's response. Of course I know, but don't tell me about it. I don't want to hear it. I mean, you can almost see the picture in your mind. Elisha's covering his ears and says, be quiet, be quiet, be quiet, shut up. I can't take it. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to confront it or face it. It's too painful. It's the kind of denial that can slip into good transitions. And then the third that I find is significant is, here's what Elisha says to Elijah 3 times. Elijah says, stay here. And essentially Elijah is saying, let's just say goodbye here, and I'm going to go to the next. I think really in a sense it's a test on Elijah's part. But each time Elisha says this, oh no, as sure as God lives and as sure as you live, I will never, shout never, I will never leave you. And what Elisha is saying, I'm not going to leave you, and I'm not going to let you leave me. And so Elisha's smart enough to know that if God is going to take him, that somehow, at some point, Elijah's going to kind of just be taken up. And so what Elisha is saying is, I'm going to stay so close to you. I'm not going to leave you. I'm going to stay right next to you so that if God tries to take you, maybe I can disrupt it. Now, at this point, it's helpful to know that Elisha is not thinking about Elijah. He's not thinking about Elijah going to heaven. He's not thinking about what's good for Elijah. Elisha is thinking about his own pain that comes with disconnection. Elisha is thinking about his own fear that comes with this disconnection. He's thinking about Elisha is thinking about Elisha. Now this gets us to a deeper revelation here, and that's This is important. This is why when we say goodbye, we always slip into what I call the middle, where there's some time of confusion and emptiness and pain. And you can't avoid it. You just should know it so that you can navigate it. It's a part of the process. And the reason it's a part of the process is because our identity is often shaped by the roles we play, the responsibility we have, and the relationships of folk in our lives. So Elisha understood who Elisha was in relationship with Elijah. As long as Elijah was in Elisha's life, Elisha understood, number one, what his responsibility was. Elisha was the chief apprentice, and he had a role that was well defined, and he had a value that was well defined, and he knew who he was. But if Elijah goes, now, who am I? He's saying in this new place. What is my responsibility? What's my value? How am I going to understand myself? I understand myself in relationship with Elijah. But if you take him away, I don't quite know who I am. This is what's happening if you've been in love with someone for a long time, you've been in a relationship, and suddenly they're gone out of your life. There's a period of time your identity is messed up because they help shape part of your identity. If there's a divorce that happens, that's the same. If there's a death that happens in someone that you're close to, you really do have to work through a period where you ask some tough questions. Who am I now in this new season? It's just different. When I was in my last year in college, I became student body president. It's a great ride. Remember, I was from a small town, used to be special needs. Here I am, student government president. Got a car, had a beautiful office, had receptions, I had a scholarship, I had my own place, my own room, a little apartment, all that stuff came with it. It was awesome. and for a year, that was my thing. And then, but the year came and went so quickly. Everybody say quickly. After a year, there was an election, and a new guy was elected. And he was sitting in what's supposed to be my office. And I had to move out of the apartment because it was his apartment now. And I remember saying to Rhonda, I'm so happy this is happening when I'm graduating because this is too painful. I get so sad. And part of what was really going on was that my sense of self, the status that came with that position was helping to define my identity, who I thought I was. And when I came out here and went to San Anselmo and went to seminary, the first semester, I'm asking myself questions like, how do I get involved in student government? And then God had to say, no. You've got to say goodbye to that season. And then in the new place, I discovered, listen, Hurmon, what God was saying. You're not somebody because you had the status. You had the status because you're somebody. You see what I'm saying? Now, this is what we have to contend with for those of you who are dealing with retirement. You may have made a good plan for retirement, right? I'm talking about this is another kind of change. You may have said, look, here's the deal. I know I got to have a certain amount of money saved up in order to retire. I know I'm going to move from here because it's too expensive. I'm going to go to Atlanta somewhere, or Texas, all right? I know I'm going to pick up a new activity because I got to fill my time. So I'm going to learn how to play golf and so forth and so on. And so you figure all that stuff out, right? And then retirement comes and you make the move and you got the money and you're playing golf. But what you did not account for is that when you went into retirement, you changed roles, you changed responsibilities, and now you're in a new place in your life, and you're now dealing with, who am I? I'm not leading that company no more. Who am I? I'm not driving educational policy anymore in the school system. Who am I? I'm not a teacher anymore where these kids greet me every week. Who am I? And what I'm saying to you, this is a part of change. You've got to look for it because then you've got to be active in beginning to try to figure out who you are in this new place. But it means you got to let go. You got to say goodbye. And then lastly, it's one of my exciting points here. Oh, I have to illustrate this because I brought the donuts. This is Krispy Kremes. Let me tell you, this is not a fake box. I am taking this home with me. But I thought I would illustrate. You see, until I say goodbye, I can't say hello. Until I let go of something, I can't pick up something. Now, this is a dozen of donuts. It's sweet. It's wonderful. But I can't live the rest of my life eating Krispy Kreme, although I've tried. But I can't. All right, but what I really need is a 6-course meal, imaginary steak and broccoli and potatoes and Tracy has, and he's trying to give it to me, but I can't quite get it, you see, because my hand is full of crispy. So now I've got to make a decision, right? Either I've got to decide to put crispy down and say goodbye so I can say hello to a 6-course meal that will help me. Come on now. Or I've got to hold on to crispy and wish I could have that. Or pretend like it's mine. But it's not. Because I don't just have crispy. Crispy has me. Give God a hand praise. That's neat. If you can't say goodbye, it's not just that you have that old relationship or that old attitude or that old image of yourself. It's that old image of yourself, that old attitude, that old relationship. It has you. And you can't be so afraid of having to work through a new identity and a new way of understanding yourself that you hold on. You gotta say goodbye. Now, here's for me the most exciting part of the text as I come to a conclusion. Most exciting part of the text. In order to get through this final stage, so you can get to a position where you can say hello, you got to work through the process of remembering. Everybody say remembering. Celebrating, say it. Giving thanks, say it. Embracing, say it. And then releasing. Now, inside of this, there's some tough experiences of your past. See, because a lot of you have unfinished endings. And what you really need to do is go back and make a list of those unfinished endings and begin to figure out either with a counselor or a therapist or a good friend or in your journal how to begin to work that process through what I've just laid out for you. And then you're going to get to a point, but many of you are afraid to do it because it's so bad that you just can't imagine anything. But go back to the text. Watch the text. Elijah wasn't aware, but not only was God directing Elijah how to facilitate change, because Elisha was walking and staying and hooked to Elijah, God was helping Elisha too. Because every time Elijah, when he went to Gilgal, he went through that process of remembering, celebrating, giving thanks, embracing, and letting go at Gilgal. Then he had to do it again at Bethel, and he had to do it again at Jericho, and he had to do it again. Well, Elisha was right there. And somewhere along the way, he's not really quite sure when it happened, but somewhere along the way, he started to celebrate, to remember, to celebrate, to give thanks, to embrace, to let go. Here's how we know. Because when they crossed the Jordan River, Elijah then looks at Elisha and says, look, obviously you want something just before I leave. I've given you all that I know to give you. I've trained you. What else do you want? And somewhere in that journey, because he was able to begin the process of letting go, somewhere in that journey, Elisha realized that if I can say goodbye, it opens me up to saying hello. Y'all ain't listening. That if I can let go, a new opportunity is emerging. And he realized that there was a new opportunity emerging with Elijah leaving. And so he says to Elijah, here's what I want. May I have a double portion of your spirit. I've got to figure out what I can keep and what I've got to let go. I can't hold on to you, but could you leave behind? I want to be your successor, but I don't just want to be like you. I'd like to be a little better. I want you to work some miracles. And this is my moment. Can I have a double? All right, here's my point. You've got to learn how to look into those bad experiences and how to separate the good from the bad so that you can say goodbye to the bad, but bring along with you the good. One of my favorite movies this year is, now listen, I went and saw Star Wars. I love Star Wars. It was a really, really good movie. It's not my favorite movie. My favorite movie this year is Creed. I'm going to tell you why Creed is my favorite movie, because it deals with this very, very question. You know, the Creed, the guy, the young man, and he's the son of Apollo Creed. Those of you who follow the Rocky movies, you know that Apollo is the guy who used to be the champion, and Sylvester Stallone beat him and became the champion, and da-da-da-da. All right, and Apollo dies, and he has this son out of wedlock, and he's never a part of his son's life. So the son grows up without his father, and now the son stumbles across the fact that he's got a gift for fighting and that he could potentially become the heavyweight champion of the world. And at the very critical moment in his journey, he has to make a decision of whether or not to claim the name Creed. And at first, he doesn't want it. He says, I don't want it, because every time he thought of the name Creed, he thought of the fact that it represented a man who wasn't a part of his life. It represented a father who was never a father to him. And he just, and basically what he was saying was, if Dad didn't want anything to do with me, I don't want anything to do with Dad. But then, be careful who you fall in love with. Because he fell in love with a girl who was smart enough to say to him, listen, take the name, and as you take the name, take what's good and say goodbye to what's bad. Take the legacy that comes with being a champion. That's represented in the name too. Take all that comes with being a champion and fast and all that stuff. A winner, yeah, that's represented in the name too. All right, let the other stuff about not being daddy, let that go. But there's a champion, you take that. That's your double portion. It's your double portion. When people die, when old relationships pass, there's some bad stuff there. But you got to work through the bad to figure out what's the good. Rhonda was here at 10. I'm finished. She was here at 10. I shared this because I wanted her to hear it. And oftentimes, it's just good for you to let your spouse hear some things. So, for years, I used to talk about the young woman that I was in a relationship before Rhonda. And I thought I was in love, then I met Rhonda. In other words, I thought I had a 10, but then I met Rhonda. And I discovered that what I thought was a 10, y'all ain't listening. All right. Previously, all right. And so I used to talk bad about this girl because she just kind of dogged me out. But as I grew, watch it, and got healthier, I'm now able to look back because I've gone through a process of remembering, celebrating, giving thanks, embracing, figuring out the good from the bad, and letting the bad go. And so here's what I'm thankful to her. Because had I not experienced her, I wouldn't know how to act in the face of quality. All right, let me flip it around. I'm almost in. Let me flip it around. I said this, and I say this to Rhonda all the time because it's true. I wish I could meet her ex. Because if I could meet her ex, I'd take him to dinner. I'd give him a really big hug because I really like the guy. I mean, you know, there's some stuff I don't like about her, but really, at the end of the day, I like this guy. I mean, I want to separate. Look, here is the good that the ex has. The good was found in the fact that he was not smart enough to figure out how to keep her. So I can celebrate it, but you know, I ain't got to carry nothing around in my heart. Are you kidding?
In every bad experience, there's some good there. There's something that's part of what the text means. It doesn't mean that God makes these bad experiences happen, but there's a way that he can turn it. There's a way you can grow. All right, here's the last piece. You guys get this. They didn't get this at the other two, so you get this. This is your bonus for coming to 12 minutes. Here's the other piece. Watch this. Elijah says to Elisha, you've asked for a difficult thing. It's not easy to separate the good from the bad. It's not easy to work through the process that I've just told you got to work through. He said, but, everybody say, but, if you see me when I'm taken, then it's yours. If you don't see me, then it isn't. Now, what is he saying? Watch this. What is he saying? He's saying, Elijah's saying to Elisha, you've got to decide, as tough as change is, that God can do great things in the midst of change. And you've got to decide to look for it. That's what he's saying. Some of us, we just look for bad stuff in the middle of change because that's our experience. Every time there's change is bad. There's change is bad. But what Elijah is saying, Elijah, if you can muster up the faith to start looking for something, if you see me when I'm taken, you got to look. You got to look. If you see me when I'm taken, then it's yours. Tell somebody you got to look for it. Tell them. You got to look for it. You got to look for it. You got to look for what God has for you. You got to look for it. You got to look for it. In every change, you got to look for what God has. You see it. If you see it, then it's yours. Here's another way of saying it. If you say goodbye, work through the middle, look for the new to come as a gift from God, then the day will come that you'll be able to say, hello. Give God a hand praise. Hallelujah. All right, here's your homework. I want you to go home and I want you to make a list of your unfinished endings. Everybody say unfinished endings. I want you to make a list. Write it down on a piece of paper. And then I want you to begin to think about, you may have to get to it, do it with a counselor. You may have to do it with some friends. You may have to get inside of your journal and start journaling it. I don't know. But I want you to begin to figure out how do you start walking through, because you want to take an unfinished ending and bring it to finish. And so you've got, how do I start remembering, celebrating, giving God thanks, embracing the good, and letting go of the bad with tears so I can say hello. And if you will do that, all I want you to do is write under the response to the message, I will look at my broken endings. God bless you.